quite a few. Right. The owl, I don't know if you guys know these things. It's worth the, can you go to the big screen on just the owl or the view over there on the right? See that?
Oh, you just pin it.
Yeah, look at this thing.
Hey,
so it follows the voice. I don't know. We don't have this kind of technology in Cannon Beach yet.
Here, I'll shut up.
But I'm looking forward to getting one of these. This is going on this year's budget. I can see this. So that's why we get to come out of our places. And so if you want to go to the presentation, I'd like to get started. I think we had a lot of people saying they'll be here today. I think traffic and summer here, I expect some will take a little while. We didn't publicize this too much. I didn't really let it out and push it out there and get the newspapers involved at all. Just gave them notice that we're going to have this meeting, but because I really want this to be a task force, kind of a working group, and at least for this very first one, our kind of organizational meeting. And so we're gonna I don't have my clicker, so I'm gonna have to ask Robert here to move forward, and then we'll do some introductions, but we'll click forward there. Okay, and so I put agendas, I sent out agendas, I sent out the How to Save a Ski Town. Hopefully some of you got a chance to read that article, because it's going to be a lot of what we're going to be getting into over the coming meetings. A lot of the models and tools that they use are the same ones that we are going to have to at least talk about and maybe adopt or versions of that. And so if you want to go to the next slide. I don't know how many people have seen my presentation before. Yeah, Steve's seen it way too many times. If Brandon was here, he would walk out right now. But thankfully, Sam's seen it a few times as well. Yeah. So what I've tried to do is get rid of some of that, put some new material in that's more pertinent, but also I want to move us towards actually sitting around in groups, doing some breakout exercises, starting to say, what do we want to accomplish with this group? And what's that look like organization-wise, capacity-wise, funding-wise, and those type of big questions that will move us forward. And what is the shape of things to come? And so this is how it had started my initial one when Steve asked me in Seaside to do his task force on housing. I had just got served my 90-day notice to find a new rental home, and I was living in Cannon Beach. It's not what you want to see, especially when you're living in Cannon Beach and you're wanting to find a place in Cannon Beach. And thank you guys. How's traffic? Is it that kind of, it goes without saying, right? So I just started, and really we'll resend or we'll reloop this sign-in sheet around, and I mentioned to the group starting out that got quite a good feedback. A lot of people with expecting about at least around 2 or 3 from each organization, and then we've asked a few others, the hospitals and the school districts as well to join us today. One of the things we'll talk about in a little bit is who else needs to be here and what does that look like going in the future. But I started out, and I want to let everybody know, I don't want to bore everybody with my past presentation, but I'm going to hit on a few of the points. And then for those that haven't seen any, I did want to at least have enough of the framework so you can know where we've been and what we want to achieve. So next slide, please. Yeah, and so this is where I got my start in planning. I started in Blaine County, Idaho, which is Sun Valley area of Idaho. And that's a beautiful Leeds, I think, platinum building that they had just built. And my office was a corner office overlooking, I think, 300 plus days of sunshine. This is my current office here, this little trailer stuck into the city hall in the back. And so I started this with the discussion of a problem statement, because problem statement, just like that 90-day notice, for all of us working in this area, we all know the pain points. We know that our challenge before us has gotten even worse in the past year, but really you know, I wanted to start off with testimonials, honestly, from every single worker and everybody we've tried to recruit. And if you'll go to the next slide. So that is the first place that I actually bought a home in Haley, Idaho, which was a workforce housing home. So that's another thing about me, is that I worked on some of the first inclusionary housing ordinances, some of the first transfer development right ordinances, some of the very first wildlife corridor, all kinds of environmental ordinances in the state of Idaho. And we won a bunch of awards for Blaine County, Blaine 2025. And so it looks like Kathy is wanting to join. If you can click on that. The problem is when you go outside of Zoom, are you getting that or no? No. Yeah. Yeah, you might have to cut out and then come back. But anyhow, that was my current home until the blue one in Cannon Beach that I had there. We just moved, and so we're now in a new place. And so that's my way of hitting the problem statement and the welcome and introduction, at least from my name's Jeff Adams, Community Development Director from City of Cannon Beach. And so the first thing I'd like to do is for all of us to kind of go around and introduce ourselves and give us the organization you're with, what your title is, your organization, and then I think what brought you to Clatsop County or the North Coast and what keeps you here. And then finally, if you can share with us, what's the one takeaway you want to have by the end of this day? What do you want to leave this meeting with as far as this task force is concerned? And so, Robert, do you want me to skip you and then we can come back to you, or are you too busy trying to figure this system out? We'll go with Denise. Denise, go ahead.
Okay. Hello, my name is Denise Laughman. I'm the director of CREST. I came to the North Coast in 2004, down in Tillamook for a job, and moved from Tillamook to Clatsop County in 2017. What keeps me here? I think it's a wonderful place to live. I really enjoy being part of the community, and I also married a local who's born and raised here, so he does not want to leave, so I don't think we'll ever go anywhere. And what's the one takeaway I'd like to see us achieve today? I'd really love to see us come up with our next steps. And, you know, this is a complicated topic, but I think figuring out, you know, the next thing we can do and how we can start to take action on this issue is really what I want to see.
I'm Henry Valenzeeper. I'm the mayor of Warrenton. I was born and raised here, like multi-gen Oregonian. So roots keep me here, I guess you could say, and a sense of identity with the area.
You're not going to use married the girl kind of thing?
No,
I'd be going elsewhere.
I hooked the girl from DC to come here. What I would like to see is a clearly defined scope of work for this group. One of the things that I've been kind of, I've been in a lot of different housing meetings, state, regional, and there's a lot of scope creep, and I don't want to be involved in something that's going to end up on a shelf again. There's been a lot of studies, I've reviewed many of them. Oftentimes they say similar things, but I also think that the challenge is not insurmountable. It will take time and investment.
Yeah.
Cam Stidell, also grew up here. Came into Cannon Beach in '62. So, yeah, you know, trying to get a work. I think that's a good idea. Just some direction. These things take winnowing down to where we have projects. And projects are fun, but it takes a lot of work to get there. So.
When have I still met my staff before?
Go ahead. Hi. Just give us your name, title, what brought you to Clatsop, what keeps you in Clatsop County, and what would you like to see us achieve today?
Okay. My name is Jay Blake. I am the 3-week-old planning director for the city of Warrenton. Yes. And my wife and I currently live in Arch Cape, the arch nemesis to the Clatsop County Planning Department. And we have been in the area now for 4 years, and we came here for jobs. My wife is gainfully employed as the chaplain at CMH, and I now work for the city of Warrenton. I'm here because I can live the good life and enjoy the beautiful scenery. As far as scope, I'm here to learn today. Yeah.
Bruce Jones, Mayor of Astoria. My wife and I had never set foot in the Pacific Northwest till 2011 when the Coast Guard sent us here. And we quickly decided we weren't leaving. We like Astoria a lot for the same reasons everyone else likes Astoria. And what I would hope to walk away from today, like Henry, is some actionable items, or at least very far along the way towards actionable items, because we've all read the same studies and I think we have the same ideas.
All right, thank you. Brett.
So my name is Brett Estes, and I am the 3-week-old new Department of Land Conservation and Development North Coast Regional Representative. And my area runs from Lincoln County, Tillamook County, Clatsop County, and then half of Columbia County. And what I can tell you is 3 weeks on the job is all of the 4 counties that I've met with so far are having conversations about housing, and they're all working to be able to see what they can do. What's interesting is other counties know that this meeting is happening today, which is very interesting. As everyone, I think, is looking at what other jurisdictions are doing, because if there are good ideas that come out of one county, others are going to be wanting to use it. And I think there's reciprocity going multiple ways. I came to Astoria in 2007 to take a job with the city of Astoria. What I can tell you is in 2007, I was in a bidding war to buy my house. My house was then worth less than what I paid for it for a number of years, and now it's back way above what I initially paid for it back in 2007. And what keeps me here is quality of life. I mean, it's a great place to be able to live, and it's kept me here, moving on from a job at the city of Astoria over to Department of Land Conservation Development. I look for things that we can take away to be able to work on specifically, and I'm interested in how can the Department of Land Conservation and Development and our housing folks be able to partner with this group to be able to move things forward.
Hello, I'm Pam Cooper, and I work at Providence Seaside Hospital. I'm the director of finance, but I wear some other hats. One of which is I now have 15 transitional rentals. So when our providers and physicians move here, or our techs, they have a place to live. So it's a challenge. I'm also on the CCO board and chair of the finance committee, and housing is a big focus there. I came here 24 years ago for jobs to work for Providence. What keeps me here is obviously my mission and core values with Providence, but just the quality of life. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to retire here, but at this point I live here. My house did similar. I built my house in '99 after my husband passed away, and it went up and then it went down, and now it's like amazing, but who knows, where would you live? Rentals it's dire. So Providence has a huge housing group. The CCO, in fact, she said to me, where's Leslie Ford? Because many of us know Leslie Ford. And the CCO is doing some creative things for our houseless population is 23.6 people now out of 1,000 have nowhere to live. And many of them are clients of, their Medicaid or have behavioral health issues. So it's a major thing. And so.
Hi, I'm Sherilyn Fry. I'm the Chief Mission Officer at Providence Seaside Hospital. I came here 6.5 years ago and was a resident of Cannon Beach until recently. I'm now a resident of Seaside and Seattle, but my heart will always be in Cannon Beach, Sam. And Lori Blake, used to work for me.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
As chaplain,
Yeah.
yeah. So same as what Pam has said, the mission, the values, we need workforce housing. It's very difficult for our frontline caregivers to come here and afford a place to live or even find a place to live. It took me 3.5 months moving from New York City to find a place to live, and the hospital graciously put me up at the Rivertide Suites for several months until I was able to buy a condo in downtown Cannon Beach, which I love. And yeah, it's just equity. It's equity in housing and equity in healthcare, and to allow the folks that serve us and the community to have a decent place, an affordable place to live.
And I forgot to say, I agree with Henry and where we want to be, because I found this on my shelf from 2018 and was able to add the new material.
I think everyone should have to bring an old binder that's on the
but this is by the same people that put out your summary, so that was good to know that it didn't die.
Hello, my name is Chad Sweet. I'm the city manager for Gearhart. I've been in Gearhart since 1993. Was lucky enough to buy a house back then. Just sorry, I thought I was going to die making $850 a month payments back then. But we made it through. What brought me here is I followed a girl. She loved the beach and I loved her. So here we are. What's keeping me here is family and just the beauty around here, but it's becoming more and more of a challenge because my family who is wanting to come back and live, you know, they work from home and they do all sorts of things. It's not happening. So I may, you know, follow them one day. What I'm most interested in is kind of the interaction with this between the employers, employees, and how we're going to incorporate them into this. And also how we're going to come in with the state in regards to infrastructure and especially looking at the rules and laws of urban growth boundary expansion.
All right, thank you.
I agree with you. Better?
Press section.
Amanda Raffenstruck, Management Policy Analyst for Clatsop County. I'm here to observe. I came here last year, and after 5 months, I came here for work, and after 5 months, I was lucky enough to find housing so I could stay. And yeah, I'm just here to observe online.
Well, hello, I'm Robin Montero, and I'm the chair of the Seaside Planning Commission. I'm from Seattle, and our first visit to Seaside, well, my first visit was in 1989, and I didn't want to leave, and my husband figured that out. I love Seaside. I love Seaside. I love the vibe. I love the lifestyle, everything about it. And what I would like to see out of this group is to look forward to an end game, a sustainable end game plan. I mean, let's have the vision. What do we want to see in 10 years? And how, and work backwards. How do you get there? So if you have the vision first, it's always easier to work backwards rather than trying to work forward with no direction. I know that Astoria just recently crossed over the 10,000 mark, and we have time in Seaside to go ahead and prepare for that and make a plan with including infrastructure, the urban growth boundary, et cetera, et cetera. So I would, I'm definitely on board to being a part of that.
Thank you.
I'm Jeff Flory. I'm the planning director for the city of Seaside. What brought me here, my wife and I moved here about 6 years ago, looking for a scenery change from the metro area. What's keeping me here is my sister also settled here in Warrenton with her husband. And so now they've started having children. So a good portion of my family now is on the North Coast. What I'd like to see out of this group is some ideas on how to get through some of the backlog and red tape to get some projects off the ground. We have projects that are just itching to move forward, but for various reasons, whether it be ODOT or DSL or other reasons, they're unable to push over the hump and get larger apartment complexes developed.
I'm Steve Wright, the Seaside Council President, and I'm one of those that bought not a vacation rental, but a vacation home here actually just 10 years ago. We just thought we'd have it for a few years, and then I retired, and turned out I retired fairly quickly and came here, and it was an easy move for us. I think I was always a small town guy at heart, as opposed to big city and being, you know, high mucky muck in a big international corporation, all that. And I got involved in government somehow. I'm not sure how that happened. A lot of things going on. City council's had a goal. I've been on the council 5 years, and 4 of those years, one of the goals was do something about housing. And we just never really went anywhere until about a year and a half ago, when we set the last plan and couldn't get anybody else to come on board with me. So I raised my hand and was in charge of that goal. And we put together a task force to at least talk about it, investigate things. Really started taking off when I think Kevin, your predecessor, hooked me up with Jeff. And then from there, talking to TJ and Tillamook, and you know, we did the study here, but we didn't do anything with it. You know, COVID hit and all of that. So I think we're back and you know, at least following somewhat what Tillamook did too. And that's really how I see this going forward. Like Jeff mentioned, we have a number of projects all the way from, you know, big apartment complexes down to much smaller things, transitional housing, affordable housing, small things that hopefully are going to come fairly quickly. And that's what I'm really hoping that will happen. Today, I just want to make sure we have some steps going forward. And I'm glad that Jeff is leading this.
Hi everyone, I'm Susan Penroth. I'm the superintendent of Seaside School District. Starting my 4th year here. I'm a native Oregonian that spent most of my time in the Valley. Came here from Eugene School District. So my goal was to come and lead a smaller district. I stay here because people are incredibly friendly and welcoming here. And I work with some amazing people.
And so, thank you for bringing the school here. Beautiful place. This is just great.
That's just the tail end of this. So
yeah.
We have a hard time getting staff. When I first started with the district, it was, can our staff find affordable housing? Now it's, can our staff even find housing? So it is a big challenge. What I hope to get today is learn a little bit about the work you've done so far, and of course how we're moving forward. Because from the school district's perspective, it's not only our staff, but housing for our families and housing for our students who, when they go to school or begin positions, can we keep them here? Is there housing for them, and is it affordable? So so they can stay at a place where they've grown up and love.
I'm Gail Hendrickson. I'm the Community Development Director for Clatsop County. And I grew up in Wisconsin. I spent 17 years as a planner in Florida. So I came here because this is not Wisconsin and it's not Florida. And I'd stay here because it's not Wisconsin and it's not Florida. And what I would really hope to get from today's meeting are some action items that can result in a tangible outcome and not just more talk and more talk.
Amen.
And I'm Mark Wheeler. I'm a Clatsop County Commissioner. I'm also the Foundation Director at Columbia Memorial Hospital. So now I have the pleasure of working with Jay's wife, Flory. And then my wife also works with Pam and with Sherilyn at Providence, Seaside Hospital. What was the question again? Next thing. Why am I here? Well, you know, I'm born and raised here. So as long as my wife continues to be happy, I'll always be here. You know, what action items I'd like to see, I certainly, like everybody has said, want to see some tangible, you know, action items and steps going forward, but also a communication plan to go out to the external stakeholders that we know need to be involved in this. And that's the development community, that's the state agencies like the LCD, Brett, and others. I mean, that's really what I want to see is how are we going to go out from this group and communicate with those that are so important in making this happen.
Ready for me? My name's Don Boone. I'm the county manager. I've been in Clatsop County for 3 years now, but I've really been here for the last 30. In 1992, I married a native. My wife was born in Astoria and grew up across the river over in Nacelle. And so she comes from a generational logging family, Scandinavian. And so somehow I have been accepted, and I'm still invited to all the holiday dinners, which is great. We came here, I came here because my wife wanted to move back home. She has aging family, and when you're from a rural area, you age in place. And it's a real challenge when you live an hour from the closest services. And so, but we're gonna stay here. And I mean, we're gonna stay here until the end. And so I love it here. People are fantastic. I've been working in the public sector for 33 years. So I've seen and done a lot. And I just think this is the place to be. What I will say about housing, what I'm looking forward to is that what Clatsop County has to do, and I say Clatsop County, I mean the collective we, is we have to know what our vision is and what our outcomes are. We need to figure out how we're going to work together to accomplish those, because none of us do it alone. And then we need to be able to share that with the state, with Northwest Oregon Housing Authority and others, so that they get on board with us, because this is too big of an issue for us to do ourselves. You know, one of the things, having worked for Washington County for almost 30 years, is there is a dramatic difference in the available resources to rural counties compared to metropolitan counties. If you look at the fact that we have the highest per capita unsheltered rate in the state, and it's not close. When you look at the fact that we have some of the highest drug use in the state, mental illness, really people should be knocking on our door, coming and saying, how do we help you? And that's what I want to get us to, is where we can knock on their door and they actually come and help us. And so, and the more we have a plan, the more we have a collective strategy, the more that we can identify those overlaps and opportunities between the cities and the county, I think we can get things done. But I think what we all know is not having housing has a huge impact on our community. And it's the low income, but it's also workforce housing. As an organization, we have the same challenges everybody else does. Is we get a lot of great applicants, but we can't always get them to go. And so, you know, it's a generational challenge, but I hope that we're all up for it, because you know, we need to make progress, obviously. You know, based upon the 2018 housing study, it's about 150 units a year. If you look at it over a 20-year period, that's a lot of housing that we have to figure out how to get built. And some would argue it should be more than that. So anyhow, that's fine.
Don, thanks. That's great. Do we have Brent? Would you like to?
Sure, be happy to. My name is Brent Warren, and I'm a city councilor in the city of Gerhardt. I was appointed about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, when our mayor was elected. So I'm filling out her remaining term through November. I have been involved in affordable housing pretty much my entire life. I should start off by saying, I like to say that I'm a native Oregonian who had the misfortune of being born in Southern California. We have lived here 40 years in the Portland metro area, and have obviously visited the coast on a regular basis. There's a lot of great cities on the Oregon coast. When we did our research, trying to figure out where we would live in the next days of life, Gerhardt rose to the surface because they had dealt with short-term rentals already, and we were just attracted to that. My working life has pretty much all been affordable housing. I was a banker for 33 years, CRA community development manager for several of the major banks. I've been through 13 mergers in my career. So I've worked with just about every nonprofit affordable housing developer and a lot of for-profit developers. In those years, I've done low-income housing tax credit investments, both through syndicators and direct investment. I've done volunteer work with Habitat for Humanity and Network of Affordable Housing, the state banking consortium, which provides construction and permanent lending for affordable housing projects. And it just seemed like a natural thing. Gerhardt is in need of affordable housing, just like everybody else on the coast. And thought maybe I could be of some help. So that's why I'm here.
All right, thank you, Brian. And one, try Kathy next. Kathy? She may not be able to speak. Because Kathy's usually not quiet. I mean, she usually is happy to speak on behalf of, and I'm not saying that's good. And well, let's move on, at least from, and we'll get back to presentation. But I didn't say what brought me here. What brought me here is the challenges, these types of challenges. I love these kind of challenges. And if there's a place that's challenging, it's Cannon Beach. Sam knows. And it was challenging to begin with, but the last 2 or 3 years with what's now upon us, you know, I listened to everyone, and just like you said, everyone has an issue. I think this is a nationwide issue. When I started back in, you know, the mountain towns, this was their issue. Affordable housing was their issue. It wasn't happening anywhere else. They didn't need to think about these strategies in rural areas anywhere else. But here, like Don said, rural areas are, you know, the kind of the last thought on so many of these different organizations, you know, state and national level organizations. And so, you know, they should be coming to us. And I think that, you know, we can set that kind of example, that kind of pilot program. And I'm glad that Steve brought up TJ and his work down in Tillamook. We're hoping to have them at our next meeting and include them in part of that discussion. What keeps me here, it's not the football, okay? I can tell you that. I'm a Georgia football fan, so if it was up to me, I'd be back there right now. But no, my wife, same thing. You know, if I can, it's like so many of you, if we can keep the wife happy, we're going to be here as long as we can. If not, we may be seeing grandchildren back in the South. So anyhow, so next up, let's move along. I wanted, you know, I've heard a lot about mission, vision, and plan. That's something we're going to get to here in just a second. But the first thing I really want to do is to get us around smaller tables and smaller groups so that we can roll up our sleeves and actually do some discussions amongst our smaller groups. And so I would ask you guys to move. There's 4 tables over there with 5 chairs at each one, which should be about right here for what we've got here. And try not to sit with anybody in your same jurisdiction. I mean, if you have to, you have to. But try to move over there and randomly sit. And we're going to try to go through some of these questions you guys are asking. How do we move the ball forward? And on this next thing. And so we'll take about 15, 20 minutes over there. So let's move over there now. Yeah. Oh yeah. Ready to work. Okay. Let's see where we can get right out. I'll tell you when.
Yes. All right. We have never officially met. I'm usually so I often mention good.
My lips are
Okay. Robert, okay, so I told you what my takeaways want to be are, I want to build some trust amongst this group because I think so many of you said, without really saying it, I think Don said it best when he said, Clatsop County, all of us, we want to build a we, and that's really what I want to start doing today, is building the we that takes these kind of regional collaboratives, the trust that needs to be there. And then I want a tacit or tactful understanding of where we want to go, just like you guys. I want a scope of work to move this forward. And then team, okay? Who's not here that needs to be here? Many of you guys talked about that. And so that's another thing that I want to kind of hit at. And so I think, so we, next up, I want you guys individually, without talking anywhere at your table, without Googling, without asking any questions, I want you to individually write down. You'll see that first question, I think, the first question under the problem statement. And what it is what is the opening scene of Star Wars? Okay? And I want you to write down, take 1 minute to answer that question. What is the opening scene of Star Wars?
Saw it 1977.
See, you remember the year.
The Christmas special or the
original? No questions, no Googling, no talking or speaking at your neighbors. See, we're in a school setting, so I thought I had the school teacher card. Okay, so what is the opening shot of Star Wars? Okay, and then that second question, what is your confidence level from 0, I've never seen it, to, which is low, to 10, I've nailed it. I know exactly what that is. Okay? Okay? Okay, now I'm going to get you guys, after you've done that, to talk amongst yourselves and to come up with what you think as a group if you answer to that question. Okay? Is it any different? If you guys can talk amongst yourselves, and each table come up with an answer. So once you guys have your consensus for your group, I want you to put the confidence level you have with that.
And then the break to the wall.
So is the next slide report out or the actual picture?
It doesn't
matter. Okay, it's time for a little report out. So which table wants to volunteer to go first?
We will.
Okay, Gail, go.
All right, what question am I answering?
Number 3.
So our consensus is it's the scrolling screen with all the words that give us the history.
Okay.
Yeah, the same for ours.
The scrolling screen.
With John Williams, the Star Wars.
Star Wars.
I've got it.
John Williams.
This to watch it and just to see if I was right. Okay.
I think it was the opening scene was on the planet Tatooine at Skywalker farm or ranch.
Okay. Now, what were your all's confidence level? What was the confidence level for you?
We're an absolute 10.
Okay. 10?
I think that's cheating. We're at 2.
Yeah. You guys are a little lower on that scale. Well, this is we thought that the credits were not representative of the opening scene. I think the opening scene was the rebel ship running from the Empire. So rebel ship, ships and the ship moving. So that's actually what you guys think, like I said, opening scene, which is interesting because I'm sure there were questions. I mean, before I even really got the question, that's all already saying, well, which episode? Well, which, and that's what. So go click to it. That's it. That's the first thing about okay. Then what's next? That's of course what I thought it was.
Yes.
And I think the majority thinks that scrolling screen, because what follows that is of course then the spaceship comes over and through, and then next. But that's really the first, maybe a lot of people could argue that's the first scene because it's the first spoken scene. And of course it's C-3PO saying, did you hear that? And so next up, please. But that's what we all are kind of waiting on. And I think a lot of people remember that. And so next, please. Okay, so keep going. Okay, so where does Star Wars begin? Right, somebody said that earlier. Episode 4, right? That's really a lot of people. And so that's often what the questions are, well, which, you talking about episode 1 or you talking about episode 4? And now there's like a zillion things. And then when does Star Wars begin? Galaxy, a long time ago, right? But what I wanted to say was just like what we're doing. It's always going to be starting in the middle of everything. We've been trying this. We have report after report after report, right? But we're starting behind. We're in episode 4 already. Unfortunately, a lot is going before us. And what does Star Wars begin? It starts with a $70 billion is what that is now. $70 billion what Star Wars is. And so that's what a story can do, and that's what we're going to be talking about. And what I keep hearing is, what's our story? What's our scope of work, and how do we build capacity around that scope of work to move us forward? And so why does Star Wars begin? Why do we do this? Go to the next one.
You're saying we need to build a Death Star for a housing?
$70
million?
I'm going to get to this. Okay? That's kind of so why do we do this? Why do we do any of this? Okay. One of the things I want to say is the reason I wanted to do this as a first breakout exercise is because the science nowadays says, why do we have these heuristics like confirmation bias and all these problems with rational reasoning and everything? Well, the latest science is that test this guy did, where if it's left to you, reason is a group, it's a social exercise. We argue, we talk about, and we come to better answers together in the social environment. Places we haven't been now in the middle of COVID for the last 2 or 3 years. this is how it happens, because we get you around tables and you come up with better solutions and better answers. When they're doing these studies now, lately, or what the science had set up until like the last 2 years, it was that, you know, we really have two modes of thinking. I think a lot of people know of thinking fast and slow and these kind of two concepts. And so evolutionary, you have this one system that works very quickly and kind of deals with the day-to-day, you know, like going to the grocery. But then you have the other slow that you have to think about and do a lot of processing. Well, now they know it's different. It's interactions. In other words, we think differently when we're in group. We need to have those conversations going so that we don't start overthinking in ourselves and causing those almost like filter bubbles within ourselves. And so, you know, that's why I wanted to have this exercise. That's why I want us to get together and I want us to start moving this forward. So next question, or next slide, please. Okay, exercise 2. So in your small groups, what do you feel you have done well in your community to help promote needed housing? And number 2, what do you feel you can do better? So I'd like to explain about 10 minutes about what you've done so far. What have you done towards affordable workforce, or what we earn now by the state of needed housing? And then we'll ask you to report that out.
Well, actually, as Seaside, it's great and that's the balance. Certainly. So that is helping long-term housing. Somebody tried to apply
What?
It's just that.
No, well, we started a little late. This is pretty cool. Got a word to it.
He is all different websites. We have a few more things that I want to do, and I figured let's get this through. And I put it on our calendar. So we can go on. Yeah. So we're going to do this every month. So we have 9 months worth of data. The summer season, winter season, and see where we just eliminated the fact. Well, everyone in the estuary. They don't need, that's an issue. Counterbalance to that is we increase availability of the concrete. Not in the back, in the front. So your water, and you qualify. So that's how we did was hard to do. 100%. And we have a so, you want to be on water. You don't need to be by the estuary. You don't need to be in the neighborhood. Exactly. So, we're trying to redirect it where, I mean, it's already been established. So it's just a matter of moving it where it should be. It's not keeping away from the neighborhood. And so, but I don't want to. Yeah, cram too much down. So that's not. Right. Same with higher density commercial areas, residential a lot of these things are heard. You know, there's been a lot that we've done. At one point, we had exposed management required 80 units. And that was awesome too, because with Dale, everybody, there was a bunch of storage space. Never going to go back to the but we think there's a good amount of we want to build out this cable. You know, you can throw carry out there all you want. Yeah, the market determines what's fine. Two more minutes and then we'll a couple years old. So that is the standard. Well, I'm gonna have this come back over here. Yeah, so
But there's still cities around. You'll see.
We don't.
So if we could make our way back over to the big circle, if anyone needs to take a restroom break, I just want to let you know, you go out the door and it's down there in the hallway. But we would like to get back to our report out and discuss what we just talked about.
What's the system level of risk? And if government is involved in development, should be at some point the state should be a professional emergency. To examine the prevailing wage requirements. It should be, we should have services that here, whatever, that should get the heritage service without your cost ever was.
So is it your oh, I believe it. Yeah, it's just crazy.
What a view from the high school library. What a view from the library.
It's something. Yeah, it's just amazing. They used to, that to be punishment to go to the library.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is the life, man. This is great.
Oh, works with him.
No, yeah, it's pretty impressive.
What was the movie again where the teenagers get attention at the library?
Breakfast.
Yeah, Breakfast Club.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Y'all know Estevez. Or Emilio. Yeah.
I had a daughter in supply from Mumbai, and so
yeah, it's an endless supply.
Yes, he matters. Is he gonna own all of Seaside? He and a couple of other people I can name.
Well, I delayed it, so it came up for approval and reading, and I postponed it because the report features are very brightly in the plan. I was not notified of giving any.
We've been trying to get.
Oh, do I need to go count?
I seriously, when I read that thing, I was like, I don't.
Well, I hate to do that because I really think that's where we're going to end up really resolving a lot of this. But does anybody from, let's see, anybody want to report out from your table of some of these? What did your group say were some of the things they felt they did well? Anybody from one of the tables want to say or summarize some of the things that really they thought they were doing well or have done well?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we only got to one anyway. So
Oh, good.
Yes, and I'm sorry, he never got to speak. In Seaside, we recently, I would say, revamped our vacation rental policy, where we have reduced density. We've omitted some parts of the city from vacation rentals at all. We've implemented a 2-year waiting period on new construction in an approved vacation rental zone, as well as a 90-day wait on a purchase in order to qualify to turn it into a vacation rental. So they don't just go bada bing, bada boom and flip it. Poor planner Flory here, you know, as soon as that news went out, he got bombarded. It cleared up to 459 on July 6th. He can probably tell you more about it.
July 7th was a great day.
Yeah, it was. I think I brought in taffy or something like that. But I think that that's going to help us to maintain or at least reestablish some long-term housing. And a couple of years ago, we elevated the fees for vacation rentals. And of course, there was a grumble the first year, but after that, it just seemed like the norm. We've also established that every March, based on the previous year's data, we will review how the data is it effective? Do we need to change something else? There are a couple of other things in our vacation rental policy that I would like to tweak, but I think, you know, one thing at a time. Don't want to cram everything down somebody's throat at once. And so we'll just keep tightening it up because it's all about a balance. If your citizens aren't happy, you know, what's the point?
Yeah. Any other tables that, you know, felt something that was working?
Well, before my time, I don't know what year it was, but the city of Astoria, they had whole house short-term rentals. So we don't have a whole house short-term rental, so we do monitor it. We know occasionally there's a scofflaw here and there that we try to catch, but for the most part, we don't have an issue with whole homes being rented out.
So you do the homestay type, right?
You can have an Airbnb, you can have up to 2 bedrooms in your house that you live in. You can rent out, and we increase the fee for that to $500 about for a fee to be able to do that. We put some changes out to allow ADUs a few years ago, although very few people have taken advantage of it. And we have some code changes moving through the planning process right now. The planning commission now coming to city council next month to increase density. So to reduce minimum lot sizes and increase maximum lot coverage, for example.
Okay. Now, what about, were there any of, you know, they thought they could be doing better, or, you know, any examples of, I know, Bruce, you've mentioned Heritage Square and what's happened there, what, you know, some of the barriers with that, and you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we had a major effort to utilize a downtown block for a affordable housing project, which would have included units for people making between 60 and 80% of area median income, as well as a Clatsop behavioral health component with 33 units at 30% of area median income for people that were in a formal program, getting treatment or getting transition out of homelessness. And that just generated an ungodly NIMBY response, a really vicious NIMBY response. And ultimately a combination of the response with the cost that the developer, because housing costs, construction costs are so high now, we were going to be asked or required to give the land up for free and contribute $2 million, basically deplete our entire urban rural funds for that area in order to make it happen. And the combination of that with the pending election, where 3 of our counselors, including myself, are not running for re-election, it was gonna doom Astoria to an ugly fight all the way through December. So we backed out of it. Just didn't work. Yeah. So certainly learned a lot of lessons about NIMBY.
Yeah, and honestly, if anyone hasn't listened to the Ezra Klein on the Blue Cities, why it's so difficult to build and housing even in Blue Cities, or he's got a new, I think it's a rebroadcast of his original one on this, or a further one. It's just recent, it's this month, I mean, this week's edition of his. So Ezra Klein, New York Times, a great podcast on it. And I've referenced that in our Housing Matters page, one of the discussions. I took the transcript from that. But that's a great article on that. So
hey, Jeff, real quick, Mayor, would you say, I mean, our group was kind of talking, do you think though coming out of that process, even though nothing ended up happening on the Heritage Square site, would you say that the issue of affordable housing in Astoria is on people's minds and is being talked about more than it was?
Yeah, I think I'm really glad we tried the project. I would much rather have tried and failed than just do nothing. It definitely raised the issue on people's radar screens. I think it's going to be harder for people to come out against the next project, especially all the people who went on record saying we support it anywhere but here. And in fact, there's a project moving forward now just 3 blocks away at the Owens Adair affordable housing unit, which is run by Northwest Oregon Housing Authority, where they're asking for a grant to be able to double the size of their facility to add, I think 50 units. Oh, wow. And 25 of the 50 will be at 25% of area median income, and the other 25 will be for senior citizens at 50% of area median income. And not a peep was raised against it, not a peep. So,
and anyone else in speak about this NIMBYism or issues with that, or because I heard density at a few different tables talked about raising density in Seaside and other areas. Have you had pushback around that, or Jeff?
The density increases have never really been discussed. It's something that I'd like to bring to the table and have that conversation about how to increase density and where it makes sense in order to add additional housing units. Okay. Right now, the way our code's written, we don't have a lot of ways to increase density in our residential neighborhoods, which is keeping developers from wanting to build on some of the land that could be redeveloped. Like the mayor said, with ADUs, Seaside's experiencing the same thing. We have provisions for ADUs, nobody's taking us up on it. How do we get the community to want to build that type of housing? Because that could be the perfect type of housing for workforce, folks, seasonal housing, folks that come in for the summer to work in Surf Town. I'm open to all kinds of ideas to get people to buy into that.
So hopefully we will be testing that water. So, I mean, we already have been very successful in ADUs, at least, I would say we're doing 10 a year or so, which really for us is, we don't build that many in Cannon Beach. And so we're seeing that. So we're going to try, I think we're going to see in our track 2 changes moving forward here soon. We're doing a code audit and rewrite of some of our ordinances. I think you're going to see us go to a workforce housing accessory dwelling unit model, to where if somebody wanted to, it's going to be like a density bonus type of thing, where somebody can add additional square footage to their home if they put it into a workforce housing model. So,
Jeff?
Yeah.
I just want to jump in on that, because an ADU generally is only going to be housing 1, maybe 2 people, and that's per property. And for seasonal housing, I don't know. I mean, when you've got a workforce that's coming in for the summer, and I'm just plucking this out of the air. I really don't have any data to back it up. Let's just say you've got 150 summer workers coming in the restaurant industry. Rather than ADUs and them taking up 75 units at 2 per, has something on a model of a hostel, like boarding house dormitory, been discussed, because that's much more economical.
Yeah, so I think that's a great place. Let's launch into at least the next, because I'll touch on some of those ideas and some of these models and tools that are out there, because I think that's really where we need to get to, is, where do we move forward with these kind of conversations? I mean, there's ideas of, where are we, I think you guys could have talked the rest of the afternoon about, these things. And so how do we, move this forward? You guys know where we started with this 2019 study, and we don't want that to end up on the shelf. That's what the other thing, I don't know if you saw over there at the table on your handout, I printed out the spreadsheet on that. And what I've done with that is, at least for Cannon Beach, I've shown or trying to put our progress so far on each one of these strategies, each one of these action items. This is something I think is next steps. At least each community can start looking at this. Where are we advancing this? And is it having any effect? Because I know Astoria, at least when they start looking from the state level down on what they need to do is now that they've reached that threshold, these are the kind of things that they're going to be asked to or required to do as a mandatory. We need to look at these seriously and say, many of these things would move that needle forward. We talk about density, we talk about the kind of encourage cottage clusters, streamline right-size minimum off-street parking. That's one of our biggest concerns is parking requirements, and especially in our downtown or mixed use areas, or, you know, they're not even trying because they know they have to replace what's already there. And if they do that, then they're not going to be able to do it because of parking. So these are the issues that we need to work through in our community. I know other communities need to do that. And I reported it out kind of in a 1 to 5 model from what's been adopted so far from those strategies and action items down to in the process of review it. The 2, no action taken so far, no longer applicable or viable, or 5. And it's this thought of moving a dashboard forward, at least from a policy perspective, and how are we doing on the planning front in that?
So let me just ask a couple of questions here, because I think this is good work, but it says cottage clusters, and it says Warrenson's not in there, but we expressly allow cottage clusters in our code, and we adopted that several years ago.
So that's what I'm saying. No one's filled it in for your district yet.
Okay.
I only did it for me because that's the only one.
Okay, this helps me understand this a little bit more, because
I'm going to ask now your planner to take this home and
I'll note this. I don't think anybody in this room, so to speak, as a jurisdiction has had as much of a difficulty with the land use aspects as Warrenton, because 2 of our last 2 city planners were homeless.
Yeah, right.
One lived in a Motel 6 and one lived in a tent at the marina. That's how bad it got. Yeah. So we're glad that he lives in Archcape, has stable housing. Yeah, it used to be that the citizenry used to get upset about if you lived in the city. Now it's, can you even get them to come to the city?
Yeah.
And but I will note that there's another issue that I'm not sure, I think we've skirted around it, is that you can create code amendments, you can create ADU codes and all that kind of stuff. The question is, will industry actually take advantage of it? At one point, Warrenton actually proposed, and it died. The city planner at the time had proposed and we started hearings on a code amendment to require ADUs on new developments. And that was like, you know, talk about burning everybody's house down to oppose it. Everyone was like, well, I'll just turn that into more storage. It's more expensive. You're actually killing the housing affordability. Then there's also the issue of, and Mayor Jones, I'd be happy if you could maybe shed some more light on it. I talked a little bit with Brett on this, but the government has an artificial cost ceiling on itself through Davis-Bacon, through prevailing wage on certain projects. How much, if prevailing wage if the public, cost, so to speak, this was a privately developed project that didn't have that thresholds and costs adds, how much do you think you could have saved, both the public treasury or whatever?
Yeah, I'm not sure what that dollar figure is.
But it wouldn't be insignificant, right?
No, right. And it also depended, there were different rules, if you're talking about the Heritage Square project, as to whether or not there was ground floor retail that was oriented to individuals outside the building. For instance, there was a higher wage threshold if there was a ground floor childcare facility that served residents other than the building. However, if it served residents in the building, you didn't pay the higher wage threshold. So there are different tiers and different thresholds depending on how the prevailing wage requirements were.
And how I would respectfully put it is that that's an artificial cost ceiling that has been put on from government onto government that really makes government work in the realm of investment into housing both unattractive to voters who have to look at the cost and say, that's absurd.
Yeah.
You know, I know one of the arguments against that was, you know, for 40 some odd units, that's that much. But also for governments to be sinking treasuries that have very limited tax revenues because the voters enacted Measure 5 and 50. So the discretionary funding to be able to throw into that is very limited. And that's the reason why Warrenton, although we went along with the study from the County Housing Study Task Force, we did not sign on to fee reductions. And we were very adamant about that from the first start, because I'm not going to put the cost of new development in onto already burdened residents or otherwise unwilling residents, so to speak, who already have paid their way in. Yeah. So the idea that we were going to start, you know, killing SDCs was going to somehow magically prompt development in Warrenton just didn't seem to turn out. And compared to other jurisdictions, we talked about this at our table too, SDCs in Warrenton are really cheap. I mean, people complain about them being high, but if you go to Tigard, I talked to the mayor there, it was like $56,000 for single family unit.
And that's a very good point. I mean,
you know, for us, it's like $5.
Yeah, and you know, that's it's so true that I mean, when we do things in Cannon Beach, I mean, you spoke earlier about the raising the fees for short-term rentals and things. You know, many of our fees and everything hadn't been changed in quite some time. And yeah, if you compare ourselves to any of the metro areas, it's not even in the same ballpark. And yet we face a lot of that. And I think it gets a little bit back to what Don is saying, that a lot of these things where you're talking about these, where it's usually, when I worked in the mountain towns of the Georgia coast, you know, you had these huge developers that did those kind of projects, that the Heritage Square projects coming over from the metro areas that did those projects regardless. And so you're kind of pricing out through that type of ceiling that you're talking
But even
about.
when we've done major code amendments in support of what was supposed to be shovel ready to go projects, I think of the dormitories and I-2 zones for Pac Coast, that was supposed to go forward. They've gotten 2 conditional use. I think they're at their last time. They can't get one anymore after December, but conditional use extensions. That was supposed to house quite their workers. Right now, their workers are housed in parts of Shiloh and in apartments across the city. Those are apartments being used for I mean, I'm not begrudging it at all. I mean, good for the company to put them up, but that's apartments that otherwise would be used for perhaps a full-time resident, so to speak, versus a worker that comes in for 6 months, leaves, and goes back to where he's home from. You know, and that's a spread out issue. We've got a lot of canneries, actually, not just that specific cannery, that have, I would guess, over a couple hundred, you know, maybe 200 or so. But those apartments that are taken offline based on that, and that both changes the livability and nature of that neighborhood, but it also, which on the scheme of things, what we're talking about is probably down here, but it also does challenge that every time you build something more, you're trying to catch up for everything that comes out.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm going to move this a little bit forward because I think some of that is discussed here in this coming up here. So, you know, regional collaboration that's highlighted in that Clatsop plan. Next slide. This goes back to our vision statement from way back 2016. We continue to do reports. Okay, keep going. But we've also had the state now saying that we need housing. They did a needed housing report. Next slide, please. And at least, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that report, but what they're saying is, at least hit the next button. Yeah, we've got 1865 cost burden units, at least from their consideration back in 2016, not to mention what's accumulated in the last 6 years. So, you know, a lot of those red zones or green zones and blue zones have transitioned more into the red numbers. And so that number has got to be much more. Okay, Robert, next one. And so in that same report, they were projecting by 2040 that we would need for the North Coast region 4,295 needed units.
And this is based on 16.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it is now. I mean, all of what we've discussed, and who was it that just said that we were needing to do 150 units a year? You know, it just gets worse and worse in this. So next up, please. So where we stand, I've shown this at every one that I've done so far in Cannon Beach, really, and we instituted a construction excise tax on the heels of kind of that report and some of the work that was being done. And we've accumulated, you know, over 255,000, probably going on 300,000 by now, just from that construction excise tax, which is only a 1% tax on our construction costs. Now, it's, you know, that's something that we've only used for Sea Lark apartments and got 8 apartments out of. But how, you know, that's what kind of drove us to say and to reach out to the other communities and said, we really need to come together as a region because, you know, Henry was saying, you know, so well is that, you know, they may waste SDC fees and all that, or may not want to do that. But if Cannon Beach really needs a workforce to live someplace, and every one of us does, where can we do that smartly regionally? Because right now we just don't have the land if you go forward on this. Buildable lands, I just want to note that study said that we had a buildable lands of about 329 unit capacity in Cannon Beach. Next slide, please. Often our short-term rental gets blamed. It is not to blame, I don't believe, in our community. We've stayed at 200 short-term rentals throughout for the last 10, 15 years. And that's mainly because of our 14-day rental policy. We only allow 2 parties every month in a short-term rental unit.
Help me understand that.
Okay.
So I view that as 200 units that could be put into people who would actually live here, well, as available in terms of just looking at available inventory, if it was to be available by regulation.
And so the argument there would be is, next slide, please. No, like I said, we've stayed at 200, but we've grown. We're continuing to add units every year. Where are they going? To second homes? They're not going to short-term rentals. They're going to second homes. That's the argument. And so you can see this number, next slide, please, in this right here. That middle gray area, that's second homes in Cannon Beach over the 10 years. It's growing in that area. It's not growing in short-term rentals. So yeah, if we took all of our short-term rentals away, I would guarantee or pretty much bet some money that 2/3 of those would go to second homes and not go to.
But instead of writing that off, wouldn't you say the policy aspect of that would be pursue the legislature to change property tax as an excise on second homes?
You know, that's where I would like to go. I'm just
I mean, you want to stop NIMBYs, that's going to really inflame the crowds,
yeah.
but
we'll talk about that. That's exactly why we need to get together as a group. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I just want to briefly, for those that don't know, you know, why we're here, I like to put some numbers behind it. So workforce, this is our workforce and where the community sheds are. Next slide, please. And I've shown this before at the last meeting for the regional elected officials, but this is each one of our jurisdictions in the area, where we live and where we work. And so as you can see, Cannon Beach has 75 people that actually live and work in Cannon Beach. The rest either commute out or commute in. And so that red area is your commuters that stay at home and work. Like me, they get to walk to work. We're very rare. And so next slide, please. And so then this is the regional workforce, our industries, okay? And so what drives our economy? And if you can see from that bright aqua color, that is accommodation and food service. And so I don't think it surprises anyone that Cannon Beaches and Seaside and Gearhart and are driven by that alone pretty much. But then again, retail trade is also a big one. And next slide, please. And so when we start looking at models and where, you know, who's like us and what we can learn from that, we start looking, I think, to the mountain town communities because they've been doing it a long time and dealing with these kind of, and so very similar kind of thing. I've put in Tillamook as also in here because TJ's gonna, Ferrelli he's their housing director down in Tillamook. He's going to be joining us hopefully at the next one, and we'll be talking about how they do it. And I've got a few slides here to show you that. But anyhow, we're very similar. I think we're very similar in at least in the Crested Butte and the Ketchum and those areas. We're not so far as Aspen and Park City as far as the dynamics of what type of industry we are. Next slide, please. But when I look at our workforce, I did just one of our city workers, so the city of Cannon Beach, and I showed that those that have been working here, you know, way back to right around 1980, you know, they live just within the city limits. But as we hire, those are the new hire dates, those dots off the right, you can see it's growing further and further astray, those that we hire. This is our entire workforce. So the next slide, please. So this is just the staff level, okay? So those that are not the department heads or directors. And you can see same trend, okay? Next slide, please. These are our department heads and directors. And this is actually, since I did this, we now have a new one, which was this one, as now living in ours. And so one thing that hasn't been brought up, or it has somewhat, is that talent that we can get and recruit. I don't know how many of you all, and you don't have to admit because it probably, I don't even know if it's for HR directors are not here, hopefully. But anyhow, I mean, the part of the questions we ask, the discussions we have, will these people actually be able to stay here and live here? And you know, those are questions that drive decisions. And Jay is here, you know, because he lives here, right? And I can afford to do this. I can afford to stay in that community. But the staff is moving further and further afield. One of the reasons why we need to get together and solve this. So next. So I did the math. I'm not going to really go into any of the numbers or any of that. We have all of this. It's going to be online. We'll talk about it further in the next meetings. But you know, when you do the math on what somebody can afford, next slide, please. And next one is that, you know, when I did that my search and I put in the numbers for the AMI and what someone can afford and not be cost burdened, there were only 6 homes available. And that was back when I did this. Now it would be even less within the county of being able to live here. So next slide, please. So how do we change that? What's the process that this group needs to do? What is the scope of work for moving us forward? This is design thinking, you know, to understand the problem, explore different prototypes and what are out there, different models, and then put those in, implement those and reiterate. And that's what iteration is all about. It's also lean theory and all that strategic design. So this is kind of a model moving forward. Next slide, please. And so exercise 3, that's what I think a lot of people said when what's the takeaway they wanted. Well, what is your vision for housing in Clatsop County 10 years from now in 2032? What do you guys see? That's what I'd like you guys to, what do you see in 2032? I heard Henry say a few things about, you know, tax structures have got to change. I mean, honestly, when I look at our situation over in Cannon Beach, that's one of the first things that always comes up, because a lot of these areas that we're going to be talking about here in just a second, you know, different models for taxing are key to some other things. Colorado has just put legislation forward to be able to use their the tourism tax towards housing, affordable housing. You know, that, you know, said in this state, I think is a chancy thing right now. But I know Steve has at least said it at his task force, and he's thought about pushing that forward. Anybody else? Where did they want to see? Anybody have a vision?
Well, I'll just put the vision that I have, which is I would like to see at least one cottage cluster built in Warrenton in 10 years. I'd like to see row houses at least built in some development somewhere. I'd like to see, and in terms of talking to housing density, you're going to need to go vertical if you're really going to accomplish it, because the buildable lands, we talk about all this land in Warrenton, but let's not kid ourselves. There's a ton of wetlands and the drainage issues are really problematic. So instead of going wide, you need to go up. That's how you're going to accomplish density, at least in our town, going forward without it cost effectively.
Yeah, density is the key.
And it's going to have to be, so as for housing, that's what I view. We had tiny home proposal in our city with the housing authority before they had their kind of shakeups. And it was 6 tiny homes around a communal kind of like gathering / laundry facility. It was in a small lot. I was really excited about it. We changed our code early about tiny homes and fell through, you know, but I've seen a couple tiny homes pop up in Warrenton. Yeah, I see that's what I see.
Okay. Anyone else? Anyone else have a vision of what they want to see in Clatsop County 2032?
I've got one that I really haven't formulated too much, but it would be nice to see some kind of zoning for all the cities in the county that would say, you know, if we are not at a certain statistical level or the amount of housing that we need, or we have this housing crisis, then maybe we should, you know, forgo some of the commercial development in hotels and restaurants that might, you know, help people to say, okay, if we are all working on the same information and we decide that we can't support what they're bringing in, which we can't now, right? We can't support the restaurants, we can't support these hotels, obviously. So if there's a threshold, it might take some of the folks that are developing to say, all right, I'm going to put in 10 apartment units. At least it kind of brings it up. So maybe some kind of, like you said, the dashboard.
Yeah, and a regional approach to land use, right? You know, we are all using, or we can be using, the electric e-permitting system. I'm on the state working group for capacity, which is the other half of needs capacity. There's 2 working groups in the state right now. And it's something that I'm pushing is that, you know, you have a database already there. You have something that should be required. I mean, my goodness, I mean, it's there, it's free, we should be using it, but it's not free, we're paying for it. And so when I came to Cannon Beach, we joined e-permitting. Why isn't there just a little module that answers, you know, these types of questions? What's the zoning is, what AMI, you know, all those little simple steps and where we are in the process so that we're not having to reduplicate those things. And we can see across the state how these kind of things are working. Where is needed housing being built? How's it being built? You know, so those are the kind of things I think we can, you know, push forward and be a strong leader in, at least in that. We're going to, my goal, and that's what you guys wanted steps forward. These are big things, these mission vision plans, this kind of thing we want to get to. I really don't think we're going to solve this in 20 minutes. And there's a lot to go through. So this is what I think we move into in our second meeting and really come back and talk about these things and get to the MVPs of what we want to do as a task force. So one of the things I haven't mentioned yet is that I don't really want to be here leading. I want to hand this off to someone else. And Denise is here, but I think a regional partner that can lead these kind, facilitate this stuff, get the action. Cannon Beach has, at least my budget I've put in for at least to start this for a year to budget this position and try to help us build this. And so that's what we want to do, is to help build this conversation. And I think Denise and Crest is a great facilitator. Maybe they're not the one that ends up doing the what we envision or come out with after this discussion, but they're the ones that I think can lead us there over the next year or year and a half to get there. And Steve led us or joined forces, or at least gave us the same platform to talk with TJ and what they're doing now. And so I'll also show you that really quickly. So next up, so what I would like to do is at least kind of put this in your head, that the mission versus the vision. Next, what is a mission? Next, is not going to be solved today. We're not going to do the MVP today. That's for the next meeting, hopefully. But what I do want us to think back is back to that Star Wars, because I'm like, but what it is, we have to tell our story. We have to convince. We've talked about the state. We've talked about the federal funding. We've talked about just what we tell our communities and those neighbors that come out and do the NIMBY. What is our story? And so describe what the character wants and what problem is getting in the way. This is the famous story arc. Describe how the problem gets worse. You know, you can think of Luke, and you can think of Star Wars, or you can think about Robert. And so Robert didn't get to introduce himself and tell them his story. And you talk about a housing story. I think you said yours about the planners in Warrington. Robert, I just hired in December.
Yeah. So I'm Robert Sinclair. I'm the city planner with Cannon Beach, and I am a poster child of all of the housing problems and also workforce recruitment problems related to housing in Cannon Beach. So I'm originally, well, I came here from Roseburg, Oregon. I'd been with Douglas County for the past 5 years. And my wife and I decided it was time to make some transitions, do something different, change the scenery. She'd been wanting to move to the coast. And so we made the decision to look for some opportunities. And we made that happen. But that came with the problem of relocation. And so we did some housing gymnastics, if you will, after I got the job offer, and we purchased a trailer. And so for, I want to say about 3 or 4 months, we were living out of a trailer park in Gearhart until we were able to find more permanent housing up in Astoria. And so, and this is the apartment we got into is kind of an interesting story. It hadn't even hit the market yet. The only reason I knew about it is because there was some bad weather. The office was closed. We were all sent home. So I took advantage of the time off, go off, look for an apartment, and found a place where they had an abandoned unit that they'd taken possession of that day. It hadn't gone on the market yet. They hadn't received any applications for it yet. They hadn't even gone in and cleared all the junk out yet. That's how limited it was right place, right time, and then we were able to make it work. It was absolute pure blind luck to find something better than the trailer.
And on that note, the reason I got my apartment was because somebody saw my presentation that I gave showing that 90-day notice, and they called me up and said, I think we have something for you. And so that's how it is in Cannon Beach. I think it's all across the county. And that would be this climax. That is the most exciting moment of the story. And the problem is that it's worse. But like I said, we're in episode 4. Is it really at the worst right now? Do we have more to come? So describe how the problem starts to get solved. Describe how the problem is finally solved and how the characters change. Next one. And so when we think through this, and I think that this is the things that those small group discussions started. Who are the heroes and who are the villains? I mean, we talked about NIMBYism. We've talked about some of the things that, maybe taxes or whatever that could change the dynamics of this. And then what are the problems that we must overcome and the dangers ahead? And then the low points. But what are the steps that are going to get us out of this and move on to some resolution? So next slide, please. Okay, so looking at models across those communities. Next slide. I gave you guys this how to save a ski town, and go to the next one. And so some of the terms that we have to at least kind of settle on, and part of also what I think is the terms that we want to use is that at least in mountain town communities, each community has workforce housing, but that housing is really tied to the people that at least work there full time, at least 9 months usually of the year. And they're the ones that can get the deed restricted rentals and the deed restricted homes. And so that's a different model than just affordable housing model and the federally funded kind of AMI models. Now, sometimes they combine and work for certain different, and you will see in some of these that we'll be talking about in our future work, is that you will see some of these that will allow up to 240%, for the doctors and the other workers in the community. And so next slide. So that's why when I looked at us, what are we similar? We look at our destination kind of as the resort communities that we now are aligned with. And most of these are the airports, and the size of the bubble is how much enplanements per each of those bubbles. We compare a lot with these communities, whether it's Aspen, whether it's Blaine County or Sun Valley area, because we are hour, 2 hours or more from the metro hub. Some of us have little airports, but like Aspen or Sun Valley, but those really are, they're tourism based, very far from a metro market, so you don't have the workforce ability to just drive it. And so next slide. Okay, and so what are the policies, programs, and projects that are successful in these areas? Next slide, please. So Pitkin County, they've got around 3,000 ownership units right now that are deed restricted already. They're demand-based project planning, and so they work on, they've got a moratorium in place right now, redoing their growth management system, and they have a certain number of units per year in each industry classification. You talk about a system that they are really development oriented and how to control growth. This is one of your models. Next up, 1,366 deed restricted units in Gunnison County, Crested Butte. This is from their latest council meeting and their retreat and what they're trying to achieve. Increased percentage of residents living in town by achieving a 75% housing full-time occupancy, and they've got it down to numbers. 30% of the units in town would be deed restricted, 15 rental units for just the town and police alone. Okay, next up. And so Park City, the same, they've got 650 total housing units, deed restricted. This is just in Park City. I didn't look, or we couldn't find really the data on the county level or across the county, so not quite comparable numbers. But again, they've set numbers that they're trying to fulfill, and then they have payment in lieu of, and then those inclusionary housing ordinances that get them the housing they need. Next up, Blaine County, Sun Valley area that I was in, they have one of the models that we'll be looking at is that the Blaine County Housing Authority is not their primary builder in the county of affordable housing homes. They have a 501c3 called Advocates for Real Community Housing that really builds most of their community housing units. And so there's various models out there that are working, and that's one of them. Next up, San Miguel County and Telluride area, they have 1,195 workforce housing units, and they're mostly funded from a residential impact fee. So for every square footage of a home you put in, you build in many of these places, you're paying added fee for that. I think Telluride for like 2,000 square feet, it is a considerable number that you're paying for. So next one, Tillamook, one of the ones I've mentioned, they just started their program really in the last year, and I think I have the slides. Are they next up or coming? Or I think we're Clatsop is the other one, of course. We have about 887 that I kind of pulled together. They're not deed restricted that I know of. There may be some that are in there that are deed restricted. Our Sea-Lark apartments are deed restricted, but only for a 10-year window. A lot of these that we're talking about, some of these other communities are in perpetuity, so that they get deed restricted for the rest of the time of those units. And so next up.
I just want to ask a question. You talk about these deed restrictions a lot. All I can think about is the Fifth Amendment requirement, you know, like a takings, because how is the government going to, without having some sort of monetary investment or incentive, how do you put a deed restriction on someone's property that's not for like avigation or something like that?
It is. It's money. It's or inclusionary housing ordinances that give you a density bonus for those types of units and get you to build, like you said, up.
But you're also talking about counties and cities that have significantly higher housing values and property tax values.
So good point. So next slide, please. So let's look at some of this. So this is exactly what I want to talk about. Okay. So organization. This is Blaine County where I worked at that very first slides and everything. This is their housing structure for the county or for the planning department for the county. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. This is the county population of each one of those comparable communities that we're looking at. So Telluride, the county population is 8,000, and it ranges up to Park City, which is Summit County, Utah, with 42,000. You can see us, Clatsop County, 41,000 county population. Next up, total county planning employees, full-time employees within planning for building or housing. Telluride, Crested Butte, Aspen with 81, Park City with 67. Next, please. What is the citizens or the population per planner? So for every 1,611 citizens in Tillamook, they get one planner or somebody in housing. We get one that for every 1,325, we get a planner. In Aspen, every 214 people, they have someone working on this kind of issues and planning. Okay. Next up. These are preliminary. I didn't really have the full assessor's data. I should not have been watching Star Wars at this morning. But anyhow, this is just my best numbers. I want to update this before our next meeting. But this is looking at the assessed values in each one of these communities. Okay, next up. This is the property value per citizen. Okay, next up. This is property values per plan. Okay. What I'm trying to get at is it's going to take some organizational change, okay? I don't know about Jeff, but I'm pretty busy. And I know, Gail, you're probably pretty busy. It takes people to move these projects forward. And it's not just committees and commissions often. It's often the people that can do the work every day to try to get these ordinances written, meet the whether we want to pull in developers and other communities to get those connections and make those changes. And so next up. Okay, so housing production, and I think it ends up with this, is that you end up, these are the percentage of those affordable housing numbers locked in, most of them locked in at deed restriction, how much of their housing is in affordable housing. And Clatsop's at 3.9. I haven't gotten the full numbers of all the communities, but these are the ones that I have, I think, pretty good data on. And that's what, that's the difference right now. So next up. So organization, I spoke about Tillamook, and I want to touch on that real quickly before we get into our last kind of discussion. So Housing Commission, they set up a Housing Commission. Okay, they have a mission statement. They meet 15 members and they're appointed by the Board of County Commissioners. It's under their county. And I'm not saying that that's the model we want to use, that it's under the county. But it's one model out there. It's the one closest to it. So I'm just using this as an example. 15 members from those different organizations. Okay, next. And this is their housing plan and their strategy moving forward. And so I wanted to highlight this because we're now going to transition into that scope of work. What do we want to do and for the next meeting and in our timeline going forward over the next year. If you look at this, you can see they've set it out with these kind of legislative committee, development strategy committee, outreach strategy committee, finance strategy committee, executive strategy committee. Like I said, they hired one fellow named TJ who does their housing for the county. And then he works with each one of these kind of subcommittees, and they meet once a month as that 15-member commission. And then each one of these meet once a month. Now, that is labor intensive, and he even admitted to me that's pretty labor intensive. And, you know, is this the right strategy for us? Probably not, but it does set down some of the areas that are the key points in moving the ball forward and how we want to tackle that going forward. Okay, next, please. And so when we talk about our vision, mission, plan, and then what I call learn. So once you make those things, you make those changes, what's the feedback mechanism, whether it's a dashboard or whatever, what are you getting back for the bucks you're putting into it and the resources you're putting into it, and then iterate and try it again, you know, which is what I hope to be talking about the next meeting. So next slide, please. So exercise 4, what is the thought? What is the thought on the organization that can take us there? Because I believe the one thing that we haven't really spoken about, and it was what I've tried to bring up in that last thing, is that capacity building. We're going to have to face the fact that we need to build capacity to get these kinds of things accomplished in the future. You know, I would hope that we know now at the around 4% number that we're getting back, that's pre-market number. But what are we going to be getting back if we don't change? If we don't make some kind of commitment of time and resources to changing the way that this ship is going. So I'm going to right about now, let Denise lead this, because I really think that Denise should be saying, you know, where do we want to go? If you guys are comfortable with Crest kind of stepping in and taking the facilitation role, I think this is a perfect opportunity to say, what are our next steps? Where do we want to go with this? And you know,
I just would like to propose that in order to ensure that Crest isn't getting, this is going to sound pejorative, it's not.
No.
That we're not dumping this on Crest.
Yes.
That the scope of work and mission be clarified prior to handing it off to any agency to take it over.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think that we're going to wander. That's just my suggestion.
That's a great point. And really the reason why I put it in our budget to walk us through the next year, because I think at least for the next year, we're going to be having these meetings and saying, or, you know, I think when Don and I had the first lunch, that was really our big concern was, you know, who's not here today? One of those members is the housing authority. And yet you saw on slide after slide, who's doing this work in most of these areas is the housing authority, or at least they have a robust presence there. Blaine County, it's not as robust, but they have other non-governmental organizations that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And so I'm gonna let you guys, you know, my thought is I think that if you want to go to, I think it's the next slide. Yeah, tools, okay. If you look at the tools here, we have those taxing things that Henry brought up. You know, there's some taxing things that could be done that really isn't being done, or we may be underutilizing. Next, there's legislative, there's zoning that we talked about in Seaside and other areas, development incentives. What we did in Blaine County, any new housing either had to do it on site, off site, or in lieu of fee for, depending on what you were getting in your density bonus, 10% to 30% of that had to be in affordable housing or workforce housing. Next up, capacity. What's the capacity? Like I've been talking about in the last 20 minutes, 30 minutes, you know, not just organizationally, but at least capacity in planning, housing, but also in supply side. Tillamook, what is funding theirs right now, at least their housing drive, is they got a big brownfield grant that is also helping them look at brownfields and converting brownfields into housing, which is like Breckenridge and some of the mountain town communities have done over the last 20 or 30 years, looking at these sites that are often overlooked for housing. And so I know the Clatsop County has put out their supply of land. Those are the kind of things. Where are these development areas, and where the UGBs and the buildable land studies or more complete buildable land studies, you know, where can we do that? That's going to be planning work. That's going to need capacity and organization to say, yes, you know, I want to continue working with Denise or whoever this regional entity, because this is what I love to do. This is my passion. And I want to be able to say, you know, if it's in Warrington or if it's in UGB of Seaside, that's the logical place. You know, that's where I want to take this discussion over the next year. And so I think, you know, just from looking at Tillamook's model and looking at other successful models from the other mountain towns, I think a logical next step is to say, we can't meet just quarterly and get anything done. I just don't have confidence that that's going to move forward. You know, this type of meeting every quarter for 2 hours, I just don't see it. We're going to have to say, who's that working group, whether it's a technical advisory committee of planners from each organization, or is it with some policy analysts? Is it around the capacity issue, bringing funding? Where's that funding going to come from? Those are the kind of questions I ask of you guys. Thoughts?
Not to pop the balloon a little bit, but I'm probably not going to have a commission that's going to be willing to fund additional study when
no study. No, I would never say another study.
I guess I'm trying to figure out, again, without a mission or at least concrete steps in moving forward, I'm having a hard time grasping more meetings about housing until we're kind of figuring out exactly what's the goal and goal here, because it is a big issue. And like when you mention like taxing, certain aspects of that taxing really aren't workable. And the city county manager put it right on the nail on the head there when he said that you look at all the graphs, you know, housing planners per people, all that inverse to everything else, you know, that we have in the state. So there's going to have to be, I don't think we're going to natively, so to speak, be able to fund that to the levels that we want it to make it to be. So the question is, studying Telluride, and I've been to Telluride a couple times for business, and I'll just note that it's just a very different, you know, Ketchum, you've got the Allen conference just got finished. The money that flows through there is just very different from here. So studying another place or looking at another place for reference to solve it, I'm not sure is actually going to work in our area. So the question is, I think, more of analyzing what we have and working from there. I don't know how else we're going to do it. Other that or beg at the legislature.
Yeah. Anybody else? I mean, so Tillamook, for instance, they're doing it committee-wise, subcommittees. Is that
that sounds painful?
Yeah.
And I see that as a recipe for burnout or disengagement from entities after a short period of time. That's just my.
Yeah. Anyone else?
My view.
What's your opinion about Oregon solution?
You know, I like that. I'm not sure if.
Is everybody familiar with what Oregon Solutions does?
Regional solution.
Yeah, it's
different from regional solutions.
I know part of it anyway. It's projects that are approved by the government are given resources are given to the community to get through very difficult and multifaceted problems everywhere kind of issues. And it's pretty labor intensive. There's lots of meetings, but there's accountability as well. And then there's declaration of cooperation at the end, where we as a community come together and we all sign the same document saying this is what we're going to do. And then with the help of Betsy Johnson, they're going to continue to touch base with that. And we had multiple committees working in different directions and fields and things like that. It was a lot of work. But this, I think, one of the factors for whether or not they would pick up such a project and allow this community to use the Oregon Solutions Group, which includes people that are very good at mediating, is this project usable outside of your community in other parts of Oregon?
Yeah.
And with these graphs and numbers and things, you know, I think that this is pretty serious.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
They may do that.
Almost like a pilot study for other areas.
Yeah, they take our information, what we've learned, try to extrapolate it out into other communities, and then help them as well.
Yeah. So, sorry, go ahead.
So one thing with Oregon Solutions, so our declaration of cooperation is non-binding. We sign it, and we should do the things that we agreed to do, but there's no penalty if you don't follow through on what you said you were going to do. That to me would be a weakness, and it was a very, very long process.
It was through COVID as well.
Well, true. Yeah.
And what's the purpose of it?
To come up with solutions that the communities can agree upon and they start heading that direction.
This particular project was related to elk and the Clatsop Plains. So how to reduce the human animal interactions. And
okay, so it's not a specific.
Not specific.
So it's just whatever problem is, this is just a help desk.
They look for complicated problems that have multiple.
They've already taken the steps from that and moved it to Eastern Oregon partially.
Okay.
They have issues with deer.
But it's a heavy one.
Yeah. So is there a hybrid approach where you could take the Oregon Solutions model and come to an intergovernmental agreement just amongst us, where we work monthly or whatever it is? It doesn't have to be our full group here today. But if we're working, like you said, Henry, if you don't feel that we're going to gain traction or have the capacity or confidence to do it until we have that scope of work and MVP outlined from the very beginning with the IGA hanging out there. That's a binding one, at least from our perspective. You know, that kind of commitment, that intergovernmental agreement. Do you think some type of hybrid approach could work?
Well,
especially if we got the state on board to back us in something.
Yeah, I want to ask a question mainly for my own enlightenment, because maybe I'm the only one who doesn't know the answer to this. But do all the cities, do you all pay a contribution to the housing authority? Because I would like to hear from the housing authority if we want this to be our primary organization to work with and provide housing. Is what funding are we already supplying to them? What do they need? And have them be sort of the leader in this discussion if we want to look to them to be our primary housing provider. I think there's a lot of, and I speak only for myself, but things that I don't know that I would not want to give you an answer today without having more information, at least on the housing authority component.
It just so happens that I've invited them to speak at the Seaside's next task force on housing. They have a new director that just came aboard. Pam Webb from the county commission is the board member representing the county, I guess is what it is. So at least tentatively right now, they are our speaker. It's August 1st, Monday night at 6 o'clock down in City Hall.
If I could.
That was kind of the reason I invited them, because I know very little about them too.
Yeah. And so I think part of the NOAA story is that, you know, housing authorities are federal programs. And so if you want them to do anything outside of that federal program footprint, they have to have discretionary dollars that are coming from other partner agencies. I will say that the county tried to get NOAA to accept some money from us, which they told us no. And we wanted them to take our money so that they would hire a housing development expert that could represent all, I mean, they could represent the entire interest of the county, so that as we were having these meetings or interfacing with OHCS or interfacing with the nonprofit housing developers, that they could be in play because they have resources, they have vouchers and other things, whether the project or otherwise. And so we offered that because we think that the housing authority historically has been the vehicle. Clatsop County has 0 housing staff. We don't have a housing department. And so my view, and given what our resource limitations are, which I think we all have to be honest, at least I have to be honest about it as a county manager, is that this issue is not going to get more difficult because our collective revenue, you know, forecasting is getting more complicated. And part of that's because of what happens with timber revenues, what happens with STRs, and some of our major discretionary revenues have an asterisk next to them right now. And so from my thinking, what's going to be important is to bring know-how along. What's going to be important, and the county, and I think it still has the support of the board of having them. We're happy to give them money today if they're willing to hire somebody who can provide some of that leadership on the housing side. Because I think that's one thing that we all kind of miss, is that this is kind of another responsibility that we always heap on the folks that are always busy anyhow. I know Gail and all of her staff are already going at 105%. And so I think that that's a worthwhile conversation to really have, is we have an asset in the community that is federally focused right now. And I think under the new leadership, hopefully they'll see an opportunity, and whether Tillamook and Columbia County would ultimately want to do the same thing. What I can tell you though is that the county doesn't have that expertise, and we don't have the resources. You know, over in Washington County, where I came from, we have a housing authority that's linked to the county, and we have a housing department that's linked to the county. And then as a result, you have a lot of interplay between the discretionary side of the county and the federal programs. And so you have a lot more flexibility. planning is so much easier, execution is so much easier. The coordinated muscle movements that happen in other places are a lot harder here because we're not resourced the same way. And that doesn't mean we can't get it done. But from my perspective, what it means is that we need every organization to be willing to kind of pivot to 2 degrees to help us get things done. And for NOAA, that means you can't just focus on federal programs. I mean, they're the linchpin in us really making major progress here. And so, you know, I think that with the new director, we will engage in that conversation again and see if they're willing to take on a little bit different role. But I think from NOAA's perspective, it would position them greatly if they would hire some staff paid by the counties, whether it's Columbia, Tillamook, and us, because then you could have a group of expertise that's just working with the counties.
And so it's one of the reasons, Don, I had the conversation with TJ after and they're very interested in what we're doing because he sees that as a logical next step is, you know, how do we get them involved and you know, Tillamook can be part of that.
I like the county being a partner with the cities and helping each other out. You know, this is an issue that touches everybody, and I'm very respectful to the city's statutory roles in these issues and the fact that every city is different. And so then we have to find where those commonalities are and then figure out how to help each other. But there is this technical side of housing, and it's really important that we have the right people assisting us and guiding some of our conversations. Because what I will say, there's a lot of good things happening right now. I mean, sometimes we talk about housing like it's just a dire situation, but there's good things happening right now. There is housing being built right now. Some of it's affordable. There's other plans. I mean, Warrenton has projects going. You know, that the Housing Authority is going to be having projects going. The issue is there's more that we need to do. So how do we do that? And then how do we continue to encourage NOAA and increase their capacity to do that work? Because the county is not going to develop housing. I think that's a fair statement. I'll look to the chair. But we can assist others, whether it's through, you know, pre-development grants or whether it's through our surplus property. There's things we can do to be partners, but I just really see this as a missing piece for a lot of this. It's just NOAA and their ability to discretionarily fund folks that can float into your cities. They can be kind of the conduit.
Yeah,
they could be figuring out where the commonalities are, where the opportunities are, kind of the canary in the coal mine, if you will. So,
and I think I brought up also the nonprofit or the NGO perspective as well, is because that's often part of the gaps they feel are that they're not the federal, you know, funded, and so they can step in and do projects that those can't do, like Henry was talking about with the problems with the taxing structure or the wage structures and things like that. So I don't know, I do have a contact with one person and had a couple lunches with them that I think was part of the Heritage Square discussion, at least from a NGO perspective. I don't know of those other groups that are working in our area of housing nonprofits, but those are others that can also supply some of that expertise and help fill some of those gaps. But any other thoughts? Anybody else? I know I'm already keeping you guys past your 4 o'clock time.
I wanted to point out that in addition to the NGOs, there is actually a nonprofit consulting company that supports other nonprofit housing developers called the Housing Development Center in Portland. They've been around for 30 years. They have an extremely knowledgeable staff and provide the technical expertise to the smaller housing organizations all over the state of Oregon. So they might be another resource. I agree that we need somebody kind of shepherd the process and to provide the expertise. I don't know that the Housing Authority, given the new executive director and the fact that they're just now coming out of a problem time for their organization, to take on a major county-wide role or multi-county role, that might be a bridge too far for them at this point in their evolution. So we might look at alternatives. Northwest Housing Alternatives is another organization. I think they were involved in Astoria. There's several other organizations that I've worked with before. Blaine County has St. Vincent de Paul. They're a fantastic housing developer. Anyhow, if you want me to put together a list of organizations, I can certainly do that and forward it on to the group.
Well, that's great. So what we might do, Brent, is at least it's what it sounded like is that, you know, next steps is to, you know, try to get at least Northwest Housing engaged, at least in this process. I don't know, Brett, have you had any contact with them at all?
No, I don't know. That was not familiar to me, so I'm not aware of that. So
okay, yeah, we'll do. But we can talk with some of these different groups, and maybe the next step is to talk about, you know, if we're not up for meeting more than quarterly yet, is to try to at least talk about the next steps in moving this conversation forward and talking about at least some type of scope of work and mission and vision for the